My name is Joe Byrne. I'm the executive CTO for App Dynamics Cisco. Been here about 5 years, former customer, living, breathing, and eating this stuff. Having a great show. Everybody else having a good show? Good time here, right? Good sessions. Love Amsterdam. This is pretty cool, right? All right, so let's get going. So our agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about FullStack Observability at a high level, just kind of what it is, what the basics are of this. And then as part of that, we have a very specific use case around security and how to help monitor and understand security at the application level. And we did some really, really cool things that we just announced. I think the press release went out yesterday, and Randy's going to kind of deep dive into that for you and show you that, do a little bit of a demo, and walk you through some of the cool new things we're doing. So with that, let's talk about the application landscape real quick, and a little bit about why we're doing this. So we've got traditional applications, those that are on-prem, client-server, kind of old school, but a lot of these applications that still exist, right, that are on-premise for us. I think most people today live in this hybrid world where you've got some pieces in the cloud, you've got some pieces on-prem, some third-party applications. It's pretty complex, right, kind of all over the place. And then now what we've started to see is with the advancements of the cloud providers, we're seeing cloud-native applications, meaning built in the cloud, not migrated to or lifted and shifted, built in the cloud, taking advantage of all of the as a platform, as a service type offerings, Kubernetes, things of that nature, a lot of open telemetry, things like that. So we've got these three different areas, and the one thing they all have in common is they're all really, really important to understand. Because applications today are your customers' basically experience with your organization, which translates into being your brand. It's also how a lot of your employees are getting their jobs done. It's through the applications that they're using. So the use of these applications is absolutely critical. And for a long, long time, we were all monitoring the back end of everything. The servers, the database, CPU, memory, network, but we weren't monitoring the application. That's like going to practice every day of the week and skipping the game. It doesn't make any sense. All that stuff is built for your customer or your employee to have a good experience on that application. So if you don't understand that experience, you're missing something. And I know because there's kind of two kinds of people in this world that I've run into. Those that understand that because they inherently understand the customer experience and are focused on that. And then there's those that got burned, and I got burned, right? So I learned how important this was. So we've talked to our customers about some of these things. And so when I talk about full stack observability, I'm talking about from the time I open my app on my phone, or I go to my browser and open the application and log in, to when it leaves my Wi-Fi out to the local ISP, out into the internet abroad, lands wherever the application servers are hosted, whether that's in a data center or in the cloud, down through the firewalls, all the way down into the data in the database. So when you hear full stack observability, that's the journey we're talking about. It's broad, it's big, it's large. And what we're hearing is people are overwhelmed with the amount of data. Right? The three tenets of FSO are visibility, having the data, insights, what does this data mean? What's it telling me? What's important? And then actions. What can I do to resolve or mitigate this issue that I'm seeing, right? So the first piece, that visibility, that's a lot of telemetry. It's a lot of data. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is, I need it all. Well, what do you do with all that data? Do you know how long it's going to take to weed through and grok this and understand and figure out what's important, what matters, and what doesn't? It's a nightmare. Let the insights engine do it. 85% say they struggle to quickly get through the root cause, right? That's a big problem that we all have to, again, going back to the applications being our brand and that experience. I have two boys, both college age, and I watch them and I ask them to do things. I'm trying to have them be more responsible. And the first thing they do is they go to their phone. If they can't do it on their phone, they don't do it. And these are the people that are coming up that we're going to be catering to. And they're in the workforce now. And not only that, if the experience isn't good, they're on to the next. My oldest just picked new auto insurance because the app, he found a way to sign up easier and quicker. Now, he's not thinking about price because dad's still paying for the insurance while he's in college, right? Eventually that will matter too. But that experience drove him to move companies, move car insurance. And then 96%, facing these negative consequences of not having genuine visibility, meaning, lack of customer experience. And I want you to think beyond just the incident itself. So the first time I experienced this world, I worked for a company that does loan origination systems in the United States. About 1 out of every 4 mortgages, home loans that went through in the US touched our software, okay? We went down for 3 days. It took us 3 days to figure out what was happening. So not only did we have everybody and their brother and their mom and their sister come together to try to figure out what was happening on these war rooms, we finally get through this. Well, our customers, as they come back 2-3 years later, and it's time for them to renew, first question out of their mouth is, remember that March 2014 date when you screwed me and I went down for 3 days and I lost all this money? What's my discount? So the costs of these failures can be catastrophic over time, right? Really, really important. So what we want to do is we want to help our customers mature, right? Go from just simply monitoring, into observability, right? Understanding the business, all of this together. So as you go through and you start out with kind of this chaotic marketing or monitoring where you're watching and you've got individual things, you're basically, is it up or is it down kind of monitoring, right? You move into something a little bit more reactive where you've got a little more intelligence around it, understanding how things are being performed. You try to work into a more proactive stance where now you're monitoring and you understand what normal is, and when things start to deviate and performance degrades, you can jump on it before it turns red, before it hits the customer. Basically not having your customer be the one to inform you have a problem anymore because you have observability. And then finally, and this is where everybody's trying to go and very few people are here, predictive. I've seen these signs before, and you've got the ML and the AI telling you you're about to have this problem. Proactively make this change. Scale up, switch this out, whatever it needs to be to avoid this problem that's coming, right? That's what we want to get to. So when we talk about this is the full context I'm talking about. So when I talk about visibility, I'm talking about every one of these areas. The application, the network, right? The hardware involved, the end user experience. But what's really critical is the business perspective. And that's what a lot of these tools out there are missing. You need to be able to tie the application to the business to illustrate the value. Applications are created with a business intent. There's a reason for that business, or for that application to exist. Sell more widgets, sell more product, whatever it is, right? So it's really important to put that context together, and that's a significant differentiator here at Cisco. Because we know how important it is to show that value to the business, because that's the whole reason it's there. It also helps the business understand how important the technologists are. Like, look, you don't just know I exist when something goes down. Like, our sales went through the roof, and it's because of this new app we put out, or whatever this may be, right? Get some credit for these things. Taking all that data plus open telemetry, right, which we know is a standard that's growing across our industry. Cisco is one of the largest contributors to this project, and just we're kind of going all in on open telemetry. We've seen a lot of our customers moving this way. So we take all this data, we have a correlation engine, we do cross-domain correlation, understand where the problem is quickly, who's it impacting in terms of business or the customer, and where and how do I fix it, right? Then you can feed that to an actioning system. So we go through, and I talked a little bit about this. We all started out with monitoring. Up, down, the main KPI was availability. Is this thing working? And that was okay at the time. We felt pretty good about it, right? Hey, it's up and running, must be good. That wasn't always the case, because a lot of times it's up and running, but the customer's got the spinning wheel of death, and that's no good, right? So I remember we would have these conversations where we had the software. I'd bring in the CIOs of my biggest customers every quarter, and we'd talk about uptime. And I'm like, yeah, we hit our 4 nines. And they're like, no, you didn't. Let me tell you all these times where we couldn't get this transaction through. So we actually changed our definition of down to be what the customer experience was. Stop and think about that. Not, are the servers up and running? What's my customer experience like? Our numbers went to hell for months because that's not where the focus was. But eventually it built better trust, and we ended up with a much, much better product, much more reliable. So now we've moved forward into this area of observability, trying to understand what the data means and beyond just up and down. We've had tool sprawl, right? But now we've got things like root cause. And now you're looking at performance as the KPI, which is good, right? Is it up, down is one thing. Am I performant? Am I meeting my needs? That's a whole nother thing. That's very important, especially, again, as you're competing with other people for either employees or customers, whichever it may be. These experiences matter. That performance matters all the time. And then, now we're at the point of full stack observability, where you're looking at the metrics, the events, the logs, the traces. And now your KPI is experience. And it's tied to business outcomes. What is this holistic experience like? Is every piece along that journey from the app all the way down to the data database humming and in line and in sync? Am I there? Understanding that. Adding in the security piece, most important of all. So why now? The timing is right? There's digitization, there's these digital transformations everybody's going through. User expectations are through the roof, because now these people who grew up online didn't adopt it, but grew up that way. We did a study when I was at Johnson & Johnson. It was crazy. We took a magazine and put it in front of this 3-year-old. She starts swiping the page. Didn't realize you have to actually turn the physical page, right? This is the world that we're going to. Pervasive availability. There is a massive amount of technology. There's mobile access. We've got all this cloud opportunities now, right? Where you can scale, and so many of the problems before are no longer there. You've got open source. So there's this community, information sharing. So now it's not just you and your perspective and what you can think of, but you get to benefit from the other people's perspective as well, right? And then the technology capabilities that we have today, the things we can do with this, and trying to monitor and watch the distributed tracing, the business contextualization, all of these aspects we've got up here. All of these matter. In the AI/ML, we're seeing how fast that's advancing things. So what we've done is we've built full stack observability. So we're working on a platform that will, at the base, take in all of this data, the open telemetry, right, from different perspectives, cross-domain, put it all together. On top of that, you can build services like App Dynamics APM performance, ThousandEyes, network and visibility, right? You can build these services on top of that, each with business perspective. On top of that, we've got business cases, use cases. These are the 7 specific, or 5 on this side. We have 5 specific use cases where we're going to talk about hybrid application monitoring those places that are on-prem in the cloud, customer digital experience with ThousandEyes and App Dynamics, modern applications, which are the cloud native, application dependency monitoring because of all the dependencies these things have, and then the application security piece. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the session on. We announced yesterday, I think the press release went out, what we're calling our new application security, business observability, business security, right? The idea here is you can already monitor and understand security vulnerabilities inside of the application with App Dynamics. We've added on top of that and taken advantage of being Cisco and brought in Talos and Kenna, and we put all of these things together in a way that they're now all communicating. We see all the user devices across the internet, all these applications and services. We bring it together. We can look at the application. We can look at the APIs through Panoptica. We can understand prioritization and scoring of those vulnerabilities with Kenna. So we take all that information, the threat database from Talos, right? About how likely it is something's going to be, a vulnerability is going to be taken advantage of. Put all this together and say, okay, these are the vulnerabilities you have. They're tied to these business transactions, and this is the potential impact of that vulnerability on that business transaction to your business. Laid out for you, so now you can prioritize. Those insights nobody else is doing, and it's critical to the success of the business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it off to somebody smarter than me. This is Randy Birdsall, our director of product, and this is his baby, and I'm going to let him walk you through it.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Nice shirt.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. How are we doing? Good. Thumbs up, smiles. I love it. I'm really excited. It's been a long time coming. This has always been my vision, is the idea that we are securing things kind of in these silos, and the app teams and security teams, they're not best buddies. Anyone here on the security team in your enterprise? Okay. Are you guys best friends with the app teams? Oh, we got one. I'm not so sure about that. All right. We'll ask the app teams later. In reality, there's a lot of friction there, right? Why is that? You've got app teams who want to move super fast. New features, right? They're not interested necessarily in making sure that everything is secured because their pressure is to release. Then you've got the security team. Their goal is make sure they have visibility and controls everywhere, right? And often they have to go to the app teams and say, hey, can you help me understand what is the architecture of your application? What are your dependencies? What part of the business is this even involved in? And in some cases, the app teams don't even know, right? Because they're also, you have the business ops side of the house, which is decoupled necessarily from the developers. So the vision I had was, can we bring this all together in such a way where we can actually get business risk observability? The idea that the insights from both security and apps and business come together in a way that everyone has shared context and can take the right priority to secure the business where it matters most. What we have done is built upon Secure Application, which was launched about 2 years ago. And for those that aren't familiar, it is used for runtime visibility to vulnerabilities in your applications, as well as threat activity, and then policy to control and block those attacks. And that's what we launched 2 years ago. Over the course of these 2 years, we have continued to build upon that and do integrations with services like Sneak for vulnerabilities and Talos for their block lists. And now, Kenna and Panoptica. So we have an idea of the likelihood of exploit, as well as insights to third-party APIs. We all know, I think as Joe was talking about, applications are not just the code that a developer writes. They rely upon lots of different services. So we are able to pull insights from across the application landscape in AppDynamics, the security insights from Secure Application, as well as all of these other Cisco services, and bringing them together into business risk observability. Now, when I talk about risk, people often ask me, okay, how do you actually calculate that? It's very simple. It's just likelihood times impact, problem solved, right? We're at that simple. But that's really the crux of it. What is the likelihood that I will have an exploit in my environment? What is the impact of a breach? What happens if that data gets lost? What kind of fines, what kind of brand reputation hit am I going to take? That information is then used to derive the business risk. And we're able to pull likelihood from lots of different sources, right? We know the vulnerabilities in the code. We know threat activity. We know whether you're internet facing. We know the risk of your third-party API usage. We pull all that information for likelihood, and from impact, that's what AppDynamics is about, measuring the performance of your business. So we understand what are the most important parts of your applications, your business transactions, that end-to-end customer experience. We already know that. We know if that application has access to data. You can start looking at those insights on the business side and all those security insights we have to get to business risk. Let me take you through a real-world example. This here is an example of a cart checkout service. All right? You have a business transaction. It's like when you go and you click, I want to buy this. It's not just one service that's responding, as you know, right? This is many services that are all interconnected, providing different capabilities. You're going to have some kind of third-party API that's pulling data or storing data. You're going to have access to a database potentially. And each one of these points can introduce either the likelihood of an exploit or increase the impact of one. In the case of a customer-facing cart checkout service, you have access from the internet. Well, that's a great avenue for attackers who don't have to have an inside access to be able to get into your code. So that's going to increase the risk. If it is a really important business transaction and you've developed monitoring all around that business transaction, it matters to your business. We already know that, and we can start to increase the impact if there were to be a breach. We understand if there's vulnerabilities, and we actually understand not just if there's vulnerabilities, but are you using the vulnerable code that's there? Because you could have a vulnerability, but if it's never executed, doesn't matter. We will tell you whether or not that code is actually executable in your environment. And then with the integration with Kenna, we can tell you what is the likelihood based on real-world threat activity, whether or not that exploit is likely to happen in your environment. Then we look at third-party APIs, right? You might be sending data or collecting information like what geolocation is this person coming from. All of that information, you are trusting and extending that trust to a third party. You're running your business along with that third party. If you can't see how they've written their applications, you don't know if they're secure. So we're able to assess that through Panoptica to determine, all right, is this third-party API something that I can trust my business on? We'll identify if there's any data stores where you're storing data, and then we'll also monitor for threat activity. If you're communicating, your applications are communicating to a bad actor, or the bad actor is coming into your application. All of this comprises into the business risk score. I want to make it real for you. I'm going to go through a demo where I think you'll see the power of all of this coming together as an industry first. We're going to start here in AppDynamics. Any existing AppDynamics customers or users here? We got a few. Okay, so this should be familiar. This is a view of the overall health of an application. But our customers aren't interested necessarily in just the app, right, as the whole. They're interested in their business on top of it. And here, we've got business transactions. These 3 business transactions are the slice through the application that delivers a particular experience. In the case of this app, which is a patient portal, a healthcare company has launched this patient portal. They care about, for instance, health records, the updating and use of health records. Sensitive data is obviously going to be traversing that, and they need to monitor that not just for performance, but also security. In this case, we can see that the business risk is in a warning state, right? So you're going to want to be able to drill into that. So we can drill into the business transaction and see what are the components that comprise that experience. What are the databases? What are the backend, the HTTP backends or APIs that are being used? What are the services that we've written that are being monitored? And we can show the security health for that. We have over here in the widgets area, we're showing the vulnerabilities or the attacks and the business risk. You'll note here that we've got vulnerabilities, right? And some critical vulnerabilities, and the business risk of 520. It's not just the vulnerabilities, though, because remember that experience that I walked through in that transaction with all those different components coming in? There's a lot more than just vulnerabilities. So let's dive into that. If we go over to the Secure App UI, here, we're actually tracking the risk over time. We're able to identify in a dynamic environment whether that risk is going up or coming down. And that's super important, that trend line, because nothing is static. The code is not static. The attackers are not static. Known vulnerabilities are not static. It's an ever-evolving environment that you need to be constantly monitoring. The way Secure App works, it's sitting inside the APM agent. It is already bundled in there, and it is constantly monitoring your environment 24/7, always looking for new vulns, new threat activity, and identifying those trends. So let's assume that you got notified that this is now moved into this warning state. What do I do about it? This is the one thing, anyone on the security team that raised their hand before, I'm guessing you get a few alerts every day about security issues in your environment, all right? We don't want to just say, okay, all of it needs to be fixed. In reality, there's only some things that you should probably go focus on first and foremost. We bubble up our guidance as to what are the 3 things that you should do in your environment to reduce that risk the most. And we inform these decisions based upon knowing, are you actually using those libraries? Are they loaded in memory? Are you using the vulnerable code? And using Kenna, we are not just saying blindly that, hey, it's a high severity vulnerability based on the CVSS score. This is actually something we are seeing threat activity on in the real world. People are actively exploiting it. Or Kenna also has a historical look back based on the technologies and similar vulnerabilities to actually predict exploitability. And so the scores that you see here, the Kenna scores, are actually telling you what you should really be focused on from a vulnerability perspective. And here's a prime example as to why CVSS doesn't always work. CVSS score here is a low. Anyone here going to remediate a low vulnerability? Security folks who raise your hands, would you worry about low? You wouldn't, right? They're ignored. And that model works in most cases. But in this scenario, we actually use our historical data, and Kenna says that this is predicted exploitable. As well, it's a popular target. So they're seeing actual activity in the wild going after this particular vulnerability. So this is indicative of the value that Kenna brings in this automated vulnerability detection as well as exploit prediction. But there's a flip side to it too. Developer time, anyone here on the app side of the house writing code? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to guess that's because they're building features somewhere, right? And those developers, their time is super precious, right? What can we do for them? If we go ahead and filter using the typical model for remediation strategy of anything critical, anything high, we're going to have to take care of, we would actually say, all right, I want you to go and take care of this Derby library. It's a CVSS severity, it's critical, we've got to drop everything you're doing. Some companies, if a critical vulnerability comes up, they have a 24-hour window, right? It has to be remediated in 24 hours. Through Kenna's intelligence, historical data, as well as monitoring real-world activity, they're able to actually say it's low risk. If you actually have other pressing things to deal with, like things that are a higher priority based on the Kenna score, go deal with those first. And then even so, if you have feature work to do, you could probably hold off on this one. So they're actually helping you make much smarter choices, invest your resources where it matters most. If we take a look back at the business transaction. The other integration we did is with Panoptica, and that is Cisco's cloud-native security solution. It gives us an idea of the third-party risk from APIs. And the way AppDynamics works, we sit in the code with agents, monitoring communication to other services, internal and external. And we already know all the APIs that are in use. So what we are doing now is taking all of those APIs that we see your applications using, and then we're passing them to Panoptica to do an assessment on the security of those third-party APIs. And we can identify risk there. In this particular example, we can see that one of the APIs that they're relying upon is using a older version of TLS. Given it's a healthcare company, we have sensitive data. This is not something they can accept within their environment. Other things that can be detected from monitoring these third-party APIs can look at the HTTP headers and actually make determinations about known vulnerabilities that exist in those APIs. Most security teams don't even know what APIs are being used and what third parties are introducing risk into their environment. So just having a catalog of the APIs is helpful. Then being able to go to that next level and say, hey, here are the security issues there, is a game changer for these folks. Now, the next thing that most customers do, we've been talking a lot about production environments and the customer experience. That's great, but what is the most expensive problem to solve? The one that's in production. If you can solve it before you get there, all the better. AppDynamics customers will traditionally deploy both in pre-prod and prod. That way, they're able to identify, do I have a performance issue with the code I just pushed? Maybe I should resolve that before I get to production. From a security perspective, that's extremely dangerous, right? Not just do you have the chance of having to stop all your development and fix a vulnerability in production, you also have the risk of disclosing all of your data and the financial and brand implications of that. So now, you can see also other business transactions that development have introduced, maybe in this testing patient portal, that are introducing risk into this environment as well. So that gives you that end-to-end full lifecycle coverage with business risk observability, whether it's pre-prod or prod. And that's so important. Going back to what Joe was talking about before, like no longer is the application just some code that you go and you make a startup service on and monitor. It's a lot of interdependent services, some that you have control over, some that you don't. It's the network, it's security. It is everything that your end customer could have a problem with as they experience the digital experience with your company. So it's important that you've got the observability in all of these domains and allow all of these teams to actually work together to solve these problems as quickly as possible. Well, thank you for your time. Really hope that we get to continue the conversation. I'm also here afterwards, as so is Joe. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. Hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thank you very much.